I'm Ryan Fraser, and really appreciate the chance to come back. I wish I was in there listening to Jacob Evans, honestly, but it's good to be with y'all, and I hope you've survived the summer pretty much. I'm glad it's a bit cooler. It's been an interesting week this last week, helping a friend building a house, and it was not the temperature to be doing it in. But since the friend was Mark Blackwelder, the dean of our college, I showed up, right? But we had a good time with that. I'm supposed to be addressing a topic that's kind of tough to talk about, and just a little bit on my background. I am in ministry. Was in youth ministry. I'm in pulpit ministry now. I'm also a licensed clinician in the state of Tennessee as a licensed clinical pastoral therapist. So with that aspect, I work with the counseling and pastoral counseling at Frieda Hardeman, but I also have a heart for kids and teens and youth and family ministry, and they kind of go together. I know a lot of the young men and young women that are preparing for youth and children's ministry at Freed are required to take counseling classes, and they really need to take more counseling classes because the need is just so big. My wife is a school counselor in an elementary school in Chester County, and she sees everything you can imagine from pre-K to third grade already. So I'm curious, with those of you in the room, how many of you have kids that are elementary age? All right, a bunch of y'all. Okay. What about junior high? Okay, some of the same hands going up. What about high school? Okay, a few. And are there any grandparents in here? All right, great. I'm looking forward to that. I'm trying to encourage my daughter to get busy. They've been married 3 years, so not quite yet. But it's good to see the group. Are there any folks in here that actually do not have children, but are just interested in this topic? Good. I would like us to start out just in Philippians 4 for just a moment as we get our minds into it. And my plan tonight is to hopefully not just lecture the whole time, but to make it more dialogical. We can take some questions and go back and forth this evening. But in Philippians 4, 8 and 9, this is a text that I use a lot with young people that I work with in counseling. And I used to, I was a clinician with Agape Child and Family Services out of the Memphis branch. And I used to see kids down about 8 years old on up. Nowadays, I will see kids about 10 years old and up. But I mainly work with teenagers and then adults these days. And a lot of times with kids, trying to help them shape their thinking so that they can think at whatever developmental stage they're at, think as clearly as possible about some things. For example, a few years ago, I had 3 little brothers come to counseling, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, and I believe a 9-year-old. And their dad had committed suicide. In fact, the oldest had found the dad who had hung himself in the closet. So I was working with different developmental ages there with those kids, and really needed to kind of divide and conquer a little bit, though I worked with them all together. But they understood things at a different level, right? A kid that's 5 years old can't think like a kid that's 9 years old or 10 years old. So think abstractly. But these verses, I think, can help us whatever age we are or what our children are. So again, Philippians 4, and starting in verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, If there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Not that cognitive behavioral therapy is in the Bible, but that's pretty close. Because you're dealing with correct cognitions, thinking about things, honorable things, good things, wholesome things, godly things, positive things, and those thoughts impacting actions, right? The doing of that. And so hopefully this evening we can touch base with some of these ideas. And we've just come through 18 months. We're not out of it yet, right, with the new strain of COVID coming. But think what it was like to be that little girl in COVID, having to wear a mask all the time. Think what it's like to be that teenager, masked up all the time. For kids that weren't anxious and depressed before COVID, many of them are now, right? And so we've got that. But beyond that, a lot of our kiddos that were already dealing with anxiety and depression issues, COVID and the masks and social distancing and isolation and quarantines and all those things definitely have exacerbated the issue. And I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of that with adults, right? Not just kids, but with kids as well. And so you think about what a mask does, all right? A mask blocks what? What does a mask block? Your face. Particularly what part of your face? Your mouth. What does our mouth do? Our mouth moves and speaks and smiles. And when we see somebody smile, that impacts us. It produces positive neurochemicals when we see somebody smile. We went through a good long period without many smiles being seen, and people not being able to see facial expressions, and a lot of kids feeling even isolated just behind that mask. And so it's contributed to a lot of issues, and I would like to see some of the more research come out on that. But tonight, my heart is in depression and anxiety. I work with it a lot. That's a book that I put out, came out in 2020, Finding Christ-Centered Hope and Joy Through Serving Others, Overcoming the Blues. I have some copies here tonight. But just dealing with these issues from a Christian perspective and dealing with the psychological aspect and the social aspect of both anxiety and depression. So, are your kids anxious or depressed? Are they stressed out? And if so, why is that the case? Well, it could be a myriad of reasons. We'll look at some reasons why kids deal with the stress, anxiety, depression. Some of it's external forces, and sometimes it's internal forces, and sometimes it's genetic forces that are at play as some heritable traits and things are passed down, including such things as clinical anxiety and depression and bipolar definitely can run in families. And so the teen years in particular are supposed to be years that are just exciting times filled with friends and fun and freedom and future dreams. And so all the fun stuff that's hopefully starting up with football and cheerleading and marching band. My son played snare drum and when he was in high school. Sports, athletics. For 16-year-olds, getting their keys and their license for the first time. So it's supposed to be that, hanging out with crazy friends, having a good time. But nothing hurts a parent's heart more when they see their children suffer. I've shared some of my story here before, just a little bit on it. When my son was 4 years old, he contracted or was diagnosed with leukemia. So from age 4 to about 7, dealt with chemotherapy every week, all the time. It was touch and go sometimes. His by the way, 20 years old now, doing well now. But to see your child suffer, for us as parents, my wife and I, to see our son suffer, we would have gladly taken his pain on us if we could have, right? Because it's just not supposed to be that way, and you feel helpless. And sometimes it's more psychological pain that we're seeing our kids deal with. So how do we talk with our kids about anxiety and depression? Here's some don'ts first, and then some do's, and then we'll get into more specifics on this. Don't make it weird. Parents can make things really weird and awkward sometimes. Try normalize the conversation. Let it be kind of a natural conversation, particularly if your young person is the one dealing with depression or anxiety, or maybe they've got a sibling or a friend and you're trying to talk them through it. Try to make it normal. Don't make it weak. So a lot of times in Christian circles, the idea has been that faithful Christians are not going to deal with mental health struggles. I think we're a bit beyond that, I hope. We realize that that's part of the human condition and no one's immune from it. It's not a sign of weakness, right? So don't make it about weakness or them being weak. Some of the strongest people I know, some of the strongest kids I know are kids that actually have mental health struggles that they work with and they deal with every day. And so I want to focus on their strength, not their weakness. The woe is me. We don't want to make it about woe is me, where we start to enable behavior in our kids, or we become the trigger where we're coddling them so much that they feel in some way that they have a license to really just stay down in the pits of despair, right? So, or the why me. Again, we want to normalize it, that bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good kids sometimes. That's just part of life. Life is not fair. Jesus said life would not be fair. He said, in this world we will have trouble, right? But take heart, I've overcome the world, John 16:33. So we don't want to focus on those types of things. On the flip side, I'll just stay with the W's, right? So that's my inner Billy Smith. But we want to make it welcome. We want to welcome the conversation. That we're open to it. We're transparent about it. Some of the best conversations I had with my kids when they were little was when Dad shared some of his own struggles with them. And they understood that I'm not Superman. And I also have struggles, just like they've got struggles. But we welcome the conversation. We use wisdom. So wisdom would be knowing, depending on the age of the kid, if you're dealing with a 10-year-old versus a 17-year-old, how to address that topic, how to match where they are developmentally. So using some common sense, but also spiritual wisdom. Being well informed. We're going to try to do some of that tonight. Where we're not going into the conversation just like a deer in the headlights, not knowing what we're talking about. We need to be well informed on this topic. And then making it a win-win situation. Win-win for them, win-win for our relationship with them, letting them know that we're proud of them, that no matter what they're going through, they can open up to us. We're going to love them. We're still going to be there for them no matter what. Right? Our love is unconditional for them, and the fact that by them speaking to us, it shows us that they're strong and that maybe we can find some external help if we need to for them, maybe finding a counselor or doctor that they can, or a minister that they can talk with. So make it a win-win. So I would like to take a look a little bit at some statistics, some sources, some scriptures, symptoms, and solutions. So let me pause right there before I just go down the road of perdition here. Does anyone have a question or a comment on anything I've said? Feel free to have comments too. I know there's lots of very smart people in here and folks that are in the trenches of parenthood. Any thoughts, any questions, any comments to this point? All right, maybe it'll come later. You're waiting to see what else I say. All right, so here we go. So one of the epidemics attacking our society, and we'll start with depression, is adolescent depression and even childhood depression. And so just some stats quickly. I don't want to bore you with a bunch of stats, but the depression rate for kids aged 12 to 17 since 2013 has risen 63%. 63%. Now some of that's probably skewed, some of that data, because young people are being a bit more open these days. It's maybe even a little bit more in vogue to, Instagram or do something on TikTok about it or whatever, right? So on their social media. But 47% rise for teenage boys, 65% rise for teenage girls. The reason, if you average it, you go, that doesn't come to 63%. Well, it actually does, because girls are twice as likely to deal with depression as boys, right? So there's twice as much young ladies dealing with clinical depression as young men. So up to 20% or 1 in 5 of all teens in the U.S. deals with clinical depression, and approximately 3 million youth per year between the age of 12 and 17. These are pre-COVID stats, by the way, so I'm not sure, I bet it's gone up, but experience at least one depressive episode each year. So what are some of the causes of this teenage depression? I think of 4 main areas, right? So the first area I'll talk about is fragmentation. A lot of kids feel fragmented. Their life is not cohesive. They have one life at school, they have a different life at home, they have a different life online, there's a different life on the ball field, there's a different life on social media. Their life is fragmented. Ironically, it's also saturated. So there's fragmentation, there's saturation. So the saturation is the messages that kids are getting from other kids and from Hollywood and from social media. What are some of the messages, some of the negative messages that our young people are saturated with? That's a question right there. You got to look a certain way. You got to look a certain way.
You're not popular unless you're Instagram or YouTube popular.
Okay. You're not popular unless you're Instagram, YouTube popular. I'm just going to repeat it for the recording. Okay, that's right. What else? What else?
It's almost like, I don't know how to say it, but it's almost glorified to be different, but an accepted different. Like, like it's like that's a big thing, I feel like.
Yes. You got to stand out.
Just like everybody else.
You got to stand out, but in a socially acceptable. You don't want to be too far off, where you're on the periphery, right? Anyone else? Right, they're also saturated with, of course, Christian kids, saturated with negative thoughts about the existence of God, things of the foolishness of spirituality, saturated with thoughts as well about their future, which might economically or academically might look a little bleak for some kids. The third is isolation. So fragmentation, saturation, isolation. Kids are more connected now than they've ever been through technology, but they feel more lonely now than they've ever felt because of technology, because it's virtual, it's not real. Okay, so isolation. And then expectation. A lot of our young people have very realistic expectations that can be depressing. And then they have some unrealistic expectations, which might be that the world is supposed to make my life easy. Everyone's supposed to bow down to me and clear the path, all right? So maybe some of those unrealistic. But those 4 things come together. And so in a different way of putting these, here are some of the things, causes of depression. So genetics and personality, social home environment, overprotective or overcompensatory parents. So we used to have helicopter parents, but now we've got lawnmower parents or snowblower parents that just literally clear the way so our kids don't suffer with anything. And the problem with it is they don't learn how to cope. They don't learn coping one of the best ways to learn is to fail. That's one of the absolute best lessons. If you fail, you're going to come back. Think about Simone Biles. I loved it this last week. Having a mental health challenges, all right, had to drop out. She comes back, gets bronze on the balance. You would have sworn it was gold, all right? But she rose up beyond her challenges. I was watching that this morning on YouTube, and just tears just rolling down my face, just knowing something maybe of what she was going through and the pressure that she had been under. But, okay, a pervasive sense of entitlement, maybe the loss of a loved one. So it could be grief-related, again, social isolation, major life changes. Just hold this. This is not about suicide, but kids are way more likely to attempt suicide in their freshman and sophomore year in high school than their junior and senior year in high school. Way more, right? And the reason is, I think, just that transition is so tough from junior high to high school. At the bottom of the totem pole, and being bullied maybe, and cyberbullied, and all those things that make it worse. Trauma as a result of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, even spiritual abuse, and conflict in personal relationships. So these are some of the causes. Gen Y and Gen Z, we're dealing with Gen Z now, the new generation, the I generation. Some of the new issues that they're dealing with are, of course, social media, smartphone usage and smartphone addiction, really, academic pressure to get into the right school, and then the lack of coping skills. So these things come together right there, okay? I'm going to jump to anxiety for a moment, then we'll try to pull these things together. So some stats on anxiety with our kids. Students aged 15 to 21 recently reported the worst mental health of any generation. It appears in mostly to blame, with 91% of Gen Z respondents saying they feel physical or emotional symptoms such as depression or anxiety. And again, Gen Z suffered with more mental health problems than any other generation ever in the history of the United States. All right, so some of the sources of this anxiety, again, scoring high enough on tests, getting accepted into the right college, receiving a scholarship, bullying, cyberbullying, school shootings. Okay, back when I was a kid, I never heard of a school shooting. We haven't had a school shooting in a little while, but what happens when a school shooting occurs? How quickly do our kids find out about it? Even if it happened on the other side of the country. Instantaneous. Instantaneous. So they go to school with this idea that today might be the day. Okay, so there's that general, and that's unfortunately a realistic possibility. Smartphone, technology addiction, social media, drug abuse, including vaping, and then I added health, COVID stuff, source of anxiety for a lot of our kids. So let's look at a few scriptures. The Bible tells us between 300, 365 times to fear not. When I was a kid, those verses were read usually in church to say, if you fear, you're sinning. That's not the purpose of the verses. The verses are to encourage us, to say, hey, God is with us, not to make us feel bad because we're having fear. And so Matthew 6, 25 through 29 and verse 34. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to your span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, for they neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you that Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Verse 34 says, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious about itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. We want to point our kids to God. We want to steer them to God. We're not God. God is God. We want to point them to God. Now, they develop their God image by seeing us and their guardians, and their idea on who God is largely formed by the parental figures in their life. But we need to tell them that it's not about us, and we don't have the answers, but God does. So if God can take care of the sparrow, and He knows what we need before we even ask, He can take care of our kids. And they need to know that. Matthew 6, 8, and 32. Philippians 4, 6 through 7. Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Your hearts and your minds. 1 Peter 5, 6 and 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. Okay, I don't want to minimize. There's a difference between clinical chronic anxiety and your normal everyday worry. Right? So I'm not going to minimize that. I understand there's a difference between those things. But these verses can help bring comfort, bring encouragement, help our young people to know, even our elementary kids, to know that God sees them. God loves them. God's there with them, even when it maybe feels that God isn't. But the Word gives us hope. Oops, I did the wrong thing there. Okay. So some symptoms of teen anxiety. Sleeplessness is one of them. It's common for teens, particularly to go to bed, fall asleep with their tablets on, their iPhones on, and that light continually on, and notifications not turned off throughout the night. So they never really go into deep REM sleep. And those lights impact their circadian rhythms so that they're not getting the sleep they need. Now, teenagers actually need more sleep than kids younger or those older. They actually need a good 7 or 8 hours for sure, maybe even more, all right? But sleeplessness. With my clients, when I have a client that's not sleeping well, that's a client, no matter their age, that they're going to have some mental health problems pretty quickly if they're not sleeping well. Nervousness and depression. So FOMO, fear of missing out, or FOBO, the fear of being offline. And so many kids get nervous when they are away from their phones. You ever try to take a phone away from an older elementary kid? You might get a violent response. I've seen it happen in a school where a principal's trying to take a phone, the kid just goes absolutely ballistic because they're addicted to that phone. It's their safety blanket, right? So many grow anxious. And then Instagram, and then fake Instagram, Finstagram. Kids have fake Instagram accounts, right? Yeah, I do know about that. All right, so where they present themselves in different ways, maybe more honest on the Finstagram. Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, ultimately not helpful, very helpful for mental health. Poor memories. How much do kids memorize these days? I made a big mistake last year. I'm going to just tell y'all, my personal counseling class at Freed. We were all wearing masks. It was going through all the midst of COVID, and I just felt so sorry for the kids, and I was just sick of it anyway. And so we were before midterm, and I was talking about this stuff to my counseling class. I said, guys, I'm going to make a deal with you. If any of y'all can memorize Lewis Carroll's The Jabberwocky, I'm going to give you an immediate A in this class. You don't have to do any more work in this class. And then I recited it because I memorized when I was in the 3rd grade or 4th grade. Just about every single student in that class memorized The Jabberwocky. And there was 1 or 2 that just wanted to earn their grade. They were those weird students, you know, they just wanted to really earn, write all the papers. But one of the girls in the class that had memorized it was the star, still is the star pitcher on the softball team. So she comes back after she's memorized it. She says, Dr. Fraser, I just want to tell you something. Don't tell anybody. She said, in our last softball game, she said, the entire game I was pitching, I was reciting in my mind the Jabberwocky. I said, how did you do? She said, I pitched a shutout. I said, don't tell the other pitchers. Your secret. But memorization, and I encourage young people, very young, to memorize a lot of scripture, right? It can, of course, meditating on God's word is way better than the Jabberwocky, but exercising our minds. Diminished attention spans. So again, on phones all the time. So some solutions to it. I'm going to give you 4 M's, all right? Do we have until 8? Okay, good. We can do it. The first M is margin. Margin. You're talking with your kids, teach them to build in space into their calendar. If you've got a 9-year-old that wants to do 3 extracurricular activities, they want to do basketball and 2 other things. The answer, what you say to them is no. That's what you say to them. That's too much. They don't have any time to play. They're always going, and it drives parents nuts, especially when you've got 2 or 3 kids and they've all got 3 extra things. That's not good for y'all. Stop it. It's not healthy. All right, so there needs to be margin built in to remove also noise and clutter every day, so kids can experience some solitude, quiet, simplicity, not just to be busy. Set a time on their phone so after they've been on the phone so much time, they can't be on it anymore. It automatically disconnects them from the internet. All right, so unplug regularly. Mindfulness, being fully present, being aware of what's going on. Multitasking is actually not really good. Not a good thing. Monotasking is better. So some mindfulness things. I'm going to have you all do this. I want you to stand with me, not for the invitation song. That comes later. All right, let's stand up. I'm going to have you do something with my anxious young people and older people. Sometimes people get really anxious in church. Christian people that are saved get really anxious during the invitation song. It just pushes them or whatever it is. I want you to stand on one foot, but just make your foot that's up just about a centimeter off the ground. Don't put the foot down. All right, just stand, keep on looking at me. What are you thinking about? What's in your mind right now? You can't do it? Frustrating? What about you? What do you think about?
I hope he didn't ask me to do it.
I'm hoping he doesn't ask me to say anything. What about you, Andrew? What do you think about?
Yeah, just only about not falling, pretty much.
That's all you can think about, pretty much, right? So balance. So balance is a mindfulness thing. Okay, y'all can sit down for a second. Just have a kid balance. Or stand by the wall. Put the hand by the wall, an inch out, stand on one leg. So that's one sense. It's just physical, all right? Find something that you can feel. So I've got my Bible. Find something around you that you can touch. Maybe the seam on your pants. Focus on that for a second. What does it feel like? What's the temperature on it? What's the texture? Just think about it for a moment. What's the shape? All right, that's a tactile sense. So fidget cubes are good. Sometimes they're annoying though and noisy. A tactile sense, olfactory sense. One young lady told me that she was dealing with anxiety. I said, what's your favorite smell? She said, this is really weird, but my favorite smell is wet laundry. Different strokes. So I prescribed to her, I said, every day I want you to do laundry. And she did. And she came back and said, I love the laundry room. I said, you're weird. All right. But the different sense kind of bring a different, so finding a smell that they like. It might be an oil or something. Our sight, so focusing on an object in the room and describing it, like the exit sign up there, the color on it, the size of it, etc. Hearing, we're going to spend 30 seconds, quiet, listen, see what you hear. Here we go. I'm not going to ask you what you heard, but I could hear about 8 different things. Some things in the room, some things out of the room, some things outside. Those are all mindfulness exercises to help a young person bring themselves back in when they feel themselves losing their mind. Right? It brings them back in. And so using those senses, using the 5 senses. Moving, physical exercise. Our kids are too sedentary. They need to exercise. They need to be out, walking, getting up, moving, playing ball, swimming. The Olympics maybe is motivating some of them. I've seen more people running lately that don't look like they normally run. Driving to Henderson, I was like, I don't think that person normally runs. I just watched Sydney McLaughlin win the 400. Management, so learning how your mind, body reacts to stress levels. Again, learning how to manage their stress. So we can talk with our kids about the 4 M's. Just make it a natural type of conversation. Learning triggers, using spiritual disciplines, fighting off cognitive distortions. Breathing, deep breathing. Breathe with your kid. What's the first thing kids forget to do when they're stressed? They forget to breathe. They start hyperventilating. Just breathe. Say, let's breathe together. Just breathe for a while together. Seeing a counselor, maybe medication, and serving others. Right. So I got like 2 minutes here. Comments, questions, thoughts. I know you're drinking from a fire hose, but you asked me to do anxiety and depression. That was a mistake. All right. What thoughts or comments, things maybe you found are helpful, even with yourself, or for a child that you've seen as helpful?